The great hall of the High Command buzzed with nervous energy, massive. Stone pillars stretched toward a ceiling that disappeared into darkness above. Ancient banners hung from the walls, each one telling the story of another species that had been conquered and absorbed into the empire. 10,000 years of victories, 10,000 years of absolute dominance. Admiral stood at the center of the circular chamber, his forearms moving in practice gestures as holographic displays materialized around him. His scaled skin gleamed under the harsh lights, and his yellow eyes scanned the faces of the Sovereign Council. Each counselor represented a different conquered species, all now proud servants of the way. Honored Council, began his voice, carrying the authority of countless military campaigns. We face a situation that requires immediate action. The largest hologram showed a three-dimensional map of the galaxy. Tiny blue dots marked systems spreading like a vast web across space, but scattered among them were new dots, red ones, human colonies that had appeared over the past 50 years like some kind of infection. The humans said, spitting the word like it tasted bad, continue their unauthorized expansion. When we first discovered them 50 years ago, they were confined to a single yellow star system. We observed them with amusement, a primitive species that had barely learned to leave their home planet. An elderly counselor from the sector raised a thin blue hand. Admiral, surely you exaggerate the threat. Our reports indicate they possess only basic space travel. Their weapons are crude projectiles and simple energy beams. Six's expression darkened. That was our assumption, counselor, but observe this. The hologram zoomed in on a sector that had been exclusively for over 2,000 years. Red dots now peppered the region like scattered seeds. In the past 5 years alone, they have established 47 new colonies in the sector. Our trade routes, which have operated without interference, for now compete with human merchant vessels. A murmur of concern rippled through the council. Trade was the lifeblood of the empire. The idea that some upstart species could disrupt their carefully maintained commercial networks was almost unthinkable. How is this possible? Demanded Counselor Ann, his features clicking with agitation. Our scouts report their ships as functional but primitive. Their crews are small, soft creatures that require artificial atmosphere to survive in space. That is exactly what troubles me, replied. He gestured, and new images appeared, grainy surveillance footage of human ships moving through space. Vessels looked simple, almost crude, compared to the elegant curves and flowing lines of design. Their technology appears inferior, yet they achieve results that should be impossible with such equipment. Sovereign Prime had remained silent throughout the presentation. Now the ancient ruler leaned forward, his throne, his ancient eyes focusing on the displays. Was old even by standards, having ruled the empire for over 800 years. His scales had turned silver with age, and his voice carried the weight of centuries. Admiral said slowly, what exactly are you suggesting? That we may have underestimated them. Your supremacy. 3 months ago, the Trade Federation chose to establish exclusive agreements with human merchants rather than renew their contracts with us. They cited better prices and more reliable delivery schedules. This revelation sent a wave of shock through the council. The Federation had been loyal trading partners for over 500 years. The idea that they would abandon trade for some unknown species was beyond comprehension. The situation grows worse, continued. Our intelligence networks report that 12 other species have begun similar negotiations with human representatives, species that have been part of our sphere of influence for generations are now questioning our relevance. The word hung in the air like a curse. For 10,000 years, the Empire had been the unquestioned dominant force in this region of the galaxy. Other species sought their protection, traded for their goods, and begged for their technology. The concept of relevance had never been in doubt. Counselor stood, his elderly form trembling with indignation. This is intolerable. We are the inheritors of the great star builders. Our ancestors conquered the void itself. We will not be displaced by some collection of primitive mammals. Agreeing voices rose from around the chamber but raised a hand for silence. The Sovereign Prime studied the holographic displays for several long minutes, his ancient mind processing the implications. Admiral, he said finally, what is your military assessment of these humans? Based on our observations, they should pose no threat to our forces. Their largest vessels are perhaps 1/10 the size of our heavy cruisers. Their weapons appear to be kinetic projectiles and basic. Our shields should easily deflect anything they could deploy against us. Their numbers difficult to assess precisely. Your supremacy. They seem to prefer smaller fleets, spread across wide areas rather than concentrated battle groups. We estimate their total military capability at perhaps 300 vessels of various classes. Nodded slowly. And our fleet strength in the border regions, over 2,000 ships, your supremacy. We outnumber them more than 6-1, and our vessels are individually superior in every measurable category. The Sovereign Prime stood, his impressive height casting a long shadow across the chamber. When he spoke, his voice carried the absolute authority of 10 of conquest. Then we will remind the galaxy why the Empire has endured for so long. Admiral, prepare a formal ultimatum. The humans will withdraw to their home system and submit to Imperial authority. They will acknowledge our sovereignty over all territories they have illegally occupied. They will pay tribute for their transgressions. And if they refuse, your supremacy lips curved in a smile that had struck fear into 1,000 species. Then we will demonstrate to them, and to any others who might question our authority, what happens to those who challenge the might of the Empire. Admiral bowed deeply. It shall be done. Your supremacy, how long shall we give them to comply? 30 standard cycles, more than enough time for even primitive minds to understand the wisdom of submission. As the council session ended and the various representatives filed out of the chamber, none of them noticed the small probe hanging motionless in the shadows near the ceiling. Its sensors had recorded every word, every gesture, every detail of the proceedings. The probe had been there for 3 years. High above the planet, a small, unremarkable ship received the transmission and quietly disappeared into the depths of space, carrying news of the Empire's decision toward distant Earth. The ship's human crew worked efficiently. At their stations, their expressions calm and professional. They had been expecting this development for quite some time. Ambassador Wei Ming sat in her comfortable chair on Luna Station, watching Earth rise over the lunar horizon through the observation decks. Massive windows, the blue and green marble of humanities, never failed to bring her peace, especially during difficult times like these. The message from the Empire had arrived 6 hours ago. Had read it 3 times, not because she didn't understand it, but because she wanted to appreciate the full scope of the Empire's miscalculation. The ultimatum was exactly what the diplomatic corps had predicted it would be, down to the 30-day deadline. Ma'am, her aide, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Park, stood at the entrance to the observation lounge. The response team is ready for your review. Turned from the window with a slight smile. Thank you, Sarah. How are they handling it? About as well as you'd expect, Captain. Nearly fell off his chair laughing when he read the part about primitive kinetic weapons. Chief Engineer wants to send them a technical manual on relativistic physics as an attachment to our reply. And Director Hayes, he's being his usual cautious self, wants to make sure we don't reveal too much too soon. Nodded and followed her aide through the curved corridors of Luna Station. The diplomatic facility was built into the moon's surface, its chambers carved from living rock and reinforced with materials that could withstand almost anything the universe could throw at them. It had been humanity's primary diplomatic headquarters for over 40 years, since first contact protocols had been established. The Situation Room was bustling with quiet activity. Representatives from various departments sat around a circular table, their faces displaying a mixture of amusement and professional concern. At the head of the table sat Director James Hayes, head of Terran Diplomatic Operations, his weathered face serious, despite the absurd nature of their current situation. Ambassador, Hayes said as entered, we've prepared several response options for your review. Took her seat and activated the holographic display. 3 different draft responses appeared in the air before her, each one carefully crafted for different strategic objectives. Option 1, Lieutenant Commander Park explained, is complete capitulation. We apologize profusely, agree to all their demands, and withdraw to Earth immediately. Option 2 is defiant rejection. We tell them exactly what they can do with their ultimatum and dare them to try something. And Option 3, asked though she already knew which one she preferred. Polite confusion, Director Hayes said, with a slight smile. We express regret for any misunderstanding, request clarification on various points, and suggest a diplomatic meeting to resolve the situation peacefully. Read through the third option carefully. It was perfect, humble enough to avoid triggering the Empire's pride, but confident enough to suggest that humanity wasn't afraid. Most importantly, it would buy them time to position assets properly for whatever came next. I like Option 3, she said, but I want to add a few touches. For the next 2 hours, the team refined the response. They added questions about cultural exchange programs, trade agreements, and joint scientific ventures. They expressed genuine interest in learning about history and traditions. They even included an invitation for imperial representatives to visit Earth as guests. The final message read like it had been written by someone who genuinely did understand why the Empire was upset, and who sincerely wanted to find a peaceful solution that would benefit everyone involved. Perfect, said as she reviewed the final draft, transmitted immediately. Standard diplomatic channels with copies to all known neutral territories. As the message was sent, turned to Captain, Head of Fleet Coordination. What's the status of our shipping? Schedule adjustments. Consulted his tablet, his expression carefully neutral. All agricultural transports have been recalled for routine maintenance. The ore haulers are completing their current runs and returning to port. Research vessels are concluding their deep space surveys ahead of schedule. To anyone monitoring human space traffic, it would look like normal commercial activity. Ships finished their routes and came home for scheduled maintenance. Nothing suspicious about that. And the Wanderer asked quietly, on station as planned, ma'am. Complete stealth configuration. The Empire's scouts won't detect her unless she wants them to. Nodded. The TCGS Wanderer was an older ship by human standards, scheduled for decommission in favor of newer designs. But what the Empire didn't know was that even humanity's obsolete vessels were far beyond anything in their local galactic neighborhood. Director Hayes cleared his throat. Ambassador, are you certain about this approach? We could end this conflict before it starts by simply demonstrating our actual capabilities. Consider this, it would be easy enough. A single human vessel could disable the Empire's entire fleet without breaking a sweat, but that wasn't how humanity operated, and it wasn't the message they wanted to send to the galaxy. James, what's the first rule of diplomacy? Always leave your opponent a way to save face, he replied automatically. Exactly. If we humiliate the Empire publicly, they become a permanent enemy. If we embarrass them in front of their client species, we destabilize an entire region of space. But if we help them discover the truth gradually, they can adjust their worldview without losing their dignity. Captain looked skeptical. And if they decide to attack anyway? Smile didn't waver, but something in her eyes grew cold. Then we'll show them why the hive mind chose to retreat rather than face us directly. The room fell silent. The incident was classified at the highest levels, but everyone present had security clearance to know about it. An extragalactic threat that had consumed 14 entire galaxies before making the mistake of probing human space. The engagement had lasted 17 minutes. Ma'am, Lieutenant Commander Park said carefully, the Empire's scouts are reporting increased activity around our border systems. They're interpreting our merchant recalls as signs of panic. Let them, replied. Fear makes people careless. Overconfidence makes them stupid. Right now they're feeling very confident indeed. Over the next several days, as humanity waited for the Empire's response to their diplomatic overture strain, things began happening throughout human space. Cargo ships that should have been carrying grain were loaded with materials that didn't appear on any manifest. Research stations that studied stellar phenomena suddenly required massive amounts of exotic matter for their experiments. Mining vessels returned from the asteroid belts with holds full of ore that seemed to bend light around it. And throughout known space, human merchant ships continued their normal routes, their crews cheerful and helpful as always. They traded honestly, paid their docking fees, and shared news from the various systems they visited. What they didn't mention was that many of their number had been quietly replaced by vessels that looked identical but carried very different cargo. Ambassador spent her evenings on the observation deck, watching Earth turn slowly below her. She thought about the message they'd sent to the Empire and the response that would inevitably come. They were proud, ancient, and utterly convinced of their superiority. They were also about to receive an education, and the difference between and experience touched the small device on her collar, a direct communication link to Admiral Sarah aboard the Wanderer. Sarah, how are you doing out there? Comfortable as can be expected. Ambassador, came the reply. The Empire scouts pass within 50 m of us every few hours. They have no idea we're here. Are you ready for the meeting? We've been ready for months, ma'am. The crew is actually looking forward to it. It's been a while since we've had the chance to make a proper first impression. Chuckled, try not to give them heart attacks. We want them functional for the negotiations. No promises, Ambassador. You know how dramatic I can be. Signed off and prepared for bed. She felt a familiar sense of anticipation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to prevent unnecessary conflict. Humanity had learned long ago that the strongest civilizations were those that never needed to prove their strength. But sometimes the universe forced your hand anyway. Nexus Station hung in the void like a metal flower, its 8 arms extending outward from a central hub. The ancient trading post had served as neutral ground for over 3,000 years, hosting negotiations between species that would normally tear each other apart. Its location in the dead zone, equidistant from 3 major powers, made it perfect for delicate diplomatic work. Admiral stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Sovereign's Will, watching the station grow larger on the main display. Behind him, 11 other heavy cruisers maintained perfect formation, their hulls gleaming with fresh polish and their weapon ports clearly visible. Message was obvious. The Empire had arrived in force. Sir, his tactical officer reported. We're receiving approach vectors from station control. They're directing us to docking arms 1 through 12. Perfect, replied with satisfaction. The humans will see our full strength the moment they arrive. His communications officer looked up from her station. Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from the human delegation. They're requesting permission to dock. On screen, the display shifted to show a small, unremarkable vessel approaching from the opposite direction. The ship looked like something a merchant might use for short-range cargo runs, its hull worn and functional rather than impressive. Felt his confidence grow. If this was the best humanity could manage for a diplomatic mission, the Empire had nothing to worry about. Sir, they're identifying themselves as the Gentle Breeze, the communications officer said, struggling to keep amusement out of her voice. Their delegation consists of 3 individuals, 3 second in command. Commander sounded incredulous. They're meeting with the full might of the Empire with 3 people. Arrogance, said dismissively, or ignorance. Either way, this will be over quickly. An hour later, Admiral strode through Nexus Station's corridors with his full entourage. 20 officers in dress uniform, each representing a different aspect of imperial might. Their footsteps echoed off the metal walls as they made their way to Conference Room 7, the station's largest diplomatic chamber. The room was circular, with a round table in the center and large windows, offering a view of the surrounding space. Had specifically requested this room because the windows would showcase his battle group throughout the negotiations. When the doors opened, expected to see 3 nervous humans huddled together. Instead, he found a single woman sitting calmly at the far side of the table. Reading from a small tablet, she looked up as they entered and was surprised by what he saw. Ambassador Wei Ming was a small woman by human standards, probably in her 60s. The intelligence reports about human aging were accurate. Her hair was silver gray, and she wore a simple dark blue outfit that wouldn't look out of place on any civilized world. When she smiled at them, her expression was genuinely warm. "Admiral, I presume," she said, standing and offering a slight bow. "I'm Ambassador. Thank you for agreeing to meet with us." Remained standing, using his full height to tower over the human. "Ambassador, we are not here to exchange pleasantries. You have received the Empire's ultimatum. We are here to discuss the terms of your compliance." His expression never changed, but she gestured to the chairs around the table. "Of course, but surely we can be civilized about this. I've ordered tea from the station's galley. I hope you don't mind." For the next hour, Admiral experienced the most frustrating negotiation of his long career. Every demand he made was met with polite questions. Every threat was deflected with requests for clarification. Ambassador seemed genuinely interested in understanding the Empire's position, but she kept asking questions that made no sense. "I want to make sure your territorial claims correctly," she said, consulting her tablet. "You're asserting sovereignty over the sector based on ancient settlement rights, is that correct?" "The Empire has controlled that sector for over 2,000 years, replied impatiently. "Oh, I see. And when you say controlled, do you mean you have permanent bases? Their administrative centers, regular patrols?" His forearms spread in a gesture of irritation. "We have ancient markers and established trade routes. Our authority is recognized by all civilized species. Interesting, because our survey teams found the sector completely uninhabited. No bases, no infrastructure, just some very old automated beacons that weren't functioning anymore." The room fell silent. Commander leaned forward. "Your survey teams had no right to be in that sector." Looked puzzled, but if no one was using it, how could there be a territorial violation? "We've been very careful to respect all active claims in occupied areas." "You seem not to understand," said his patience finally snapping. "This is not a negotiation about territorial boundaries. This is not a discussion about trade rights. This is a capitulation. You will withdraw from all contested areas. You will acknowledge imperial sovereignty, and you will pay tribute for your transgressions." Sighed sadly and touched a small device on her collar. "Admiral, could you join us, please?" Was about to ask who Admiral was when every alarm in his tactical implants began screaming at once. The massive windows of the conference room suddenly filled with light as something enormous materialized directly alongside Nexus Station. The TCGS Wanderer hung in space like a metal mountain. The ship was easily 10 times the size of the largest vessel in his battle group. Its hull dark and angular, bristling with weapons that his implants couldn't identify. But the truly terrifying part wasn't the ship's size or its obvious firepower. It was the fact that his sensors had never detected it. "How?" Commander whispered. A soft chime filled the conference room, and a figure materialized in the center of the space. Not a hologram, but an actual person, transported directly from her ship. Through technology the Empire had only theorized about. Admiral Sarah was tall and athletic, with short brown hair and calm gray eyes. She wore a simple black uniform with minimum decorations, but her presence seemed to fill the entire room. When she looked at the delegation, felt an instinctive urge to step backward. She said pleasantly, her voice carrying the same warm tone as ambassadors, "I apologize for the dramatic entrance, but I thought it might be helpful to continue this conversation with all cards on the table." Tactical implants were feeding him constant stream of impossible data. The Wanderer's energy signature suggested power generation capability that exceeded most stars. Its shield harmonics cycled through frequencies that shouldn't be possible to generate. Its weapon ports has unknown technology. "Recommend immediate withdrawal." Admiral said politely, "Perhaps you could help clarify some misconceptions about human capabilities." Nodded and gestured casually. Holographic displays materialized around the conference table, showing detailed schematics and performance data that made his head spin. "I think there may have been some confusion about our technology level," said conversationally. "Your scouts observed our merchant vessels and made certain assumptions. Understandable, really, but somewhat inaccurate." The holographs showed cross-sections of human weapons, what the Empire had dismissed as primitive kinetic projectiles were revealed to be relativistic slugs capable of punching through planetary crusts. The simple energy beams were focused plasma streams that could ignite gas giants. "Our defensive systems," continued, "rely primarily on spatial distortion fields rather than traditional armor or shields. It's an older technology, but we found it quite reliable." She gestured again, and the displays showed the current positions of human vessels throughout the galaxy. Stared in growing horror as the scope of humanity's deployment became clear. Every major world had human ships within striking distance, ships that had been there for months, completely undetected. "We've been watching your empire for quite some time," explained her tone, remaining conversational. "Your expansion patterns, your trade routes, your military deployments. Fascinating civilization, really. Your social structure shows remarkable stability." Commander found his voice. "How many ships do you have?" "Seemed to consider this. In this galaxy, currently about 12,000 vessels of various classes, though most of our fleet is engaged in deep space operations several galaxies away." The number hit like a physical blow. 12,000 ships in this galaxy alone. His tactical implants struggled to process the implications. Ambassador mentioned ancient settlement rights continued, "And I think that's worth discussing. Humanity has been actively monitoring this region of space for about 80 years. We've maintained observation posts conducted regular surveys, and provided assistance to developing civilization. As needed, assistance managed to ask. Answered this time, her voice still gentle. Disaster relief mainly, when the star began showing instability 50 years ago. We helped evacuate the population and find them suitable colony worlds when the plague outbreak threatened to spread. Beyond their borders, we provided medical supplies and technological assistance. The plague that we helped them contain said slowly. Actually, we handled that, corrected politely. Your medical teams were running some very creative theories, but the situation required a more direct approach. We synthesized a cure and distributed it through their water supply. The whole crisis was resolved in about 6 days. Admiral felt his worldview crumbling around him. For 10,000 years, the Empire had been the dominant power in their region of space. Other species looked to them for protection, guidance, and technological advancement. Now he was learning that humanity had been quietly managing regional crises for decades, operating on a scale that made his empire look like a small planetary government. The truth is, Ambassador said gently, we've been protecting this entire galactic region. Your expansion has been moving you toward territories occupied by species that would view the Empire as we might view an anthill. Impressive in its own way, but not really equipped to handle serious threats. Added, we've been serving as a buffer, making sure you don't accidentally attract attention from entities that might not be as diplomatic as we are. The conference room fell silent except for the quiet hum of the station's life support systems. Through the windows, could see his battle group, 12 heavy cruisers that had seemed so impressive just hours ago. Now they looked like toys floating next to the dark bulk of the Wanderer. What happens now? He asked quietly. Ambassador smiled, and for the first time understood that her gentle expression had never been diplomatic courtesy. It had been the patient amusement of someone watching a child discover that the world was much larger than they had imagined. Now, she said, we discuss how to proceed in a way that benefits everyone. Admiral moved to the large windows overlooking space, her hands clasped behind her back as she gazed out at the battle group, the 12 heavy cruisers that had seemed so imposing just hours before now looked fragile and small against the backdrop of stars. The question, she said quietly, is where to begin. Your intelligence reports about humanity are, well, they're not wrong exactly, they're just looking at the wrong things. She turned back to face Admiral and his delegation, who were still struggling to process what they had just learned, the revelation that humanity possessed technology far beyond their own was shocking enough. The discovery that human ships had been watching them for decades was worse, but the implications of what they were hearing were truly staggering. Let me start with something simple, continued, gesturing toward the Wanderer. The ship you're looking at is scheduled for decommission. We consider her outdated technology. She's about 40 years old, which makes her one of our older vessels still in active service. Commander's voice cracked slightly. Outdated. The power systems are inefficient by modern standards, explained matter-of-factly. The spatial distortion generators require too much maintenance, and the consciousness interface technology is 3 generations behind current. Specifications. Admiral's tactical implants were still feeding him data about the Wanderer, and every reading suggested technology that his civilization couldn't even theorize about. What do your modern ships look like? Smiled, but there was something in her expression that made the officers nervous. I think that might be too much information for one day. Baby steps. Admiral. Ambassador activated her tablet and projected a new set of holographic displays. Perhaps it would help to review the timeline of human expansion. You've been operating under certain assumptions about our development that need to be corrected. The display showed a 3-dimensional map of human space over time. 50 years ago, humanity had indeed been confined to their home system, but the expansion that followed hadn't been the desperate scramble of a young species reaching for the stars. It had been methodical, purposeful, and far more extensive than the Empire had realized. We didn't discover faster than light travel explained, we rediscovered it. Humanity has actually been spacefaring for about 800 years. What you've observed over the past 50 years wasn't first contact with the galaxy, it was our return to galactic affairs after a period of isolation. Isolation, asked, took over the explanation. About 700 years ago, humanity encountered a species called the Devourers, extragalactic entities that consumed entire civilizations for sustenance. The war lasted 80 years and ended with humanity victorious, but at a terrible cost. Our population was reduced to a few billion. Our colonies were destroyed and our infrastructure was in ruins. She paused, looking out at the stars. Again, we made a decision. Humanity would rebuild in secret, far from galactic politics, until we were strong enough to ensure that such a catastrophe could never happen again. The holographic display showed the true scope of human space, not just the colonies the Empire was aware of, but thousands of others. Research stations, military bases, manufacturing centers, and population hubs spread across dozens of galactic sectors. Some were hidden completely, others were disguised as natural phenomena or automated mining operations. The colonies you've observed, said, are our public-face trade posts and cultural centers designed to interact with other species. The rest of our civilization operates elsewhere. Studied the displays, his forearms trembling slightly as he began to understand the magnitude of humanity's deception. How many humans are there? Current population is approximately 200 billion, replied casually, though that doesn't count the post-human communities or the uploaded consciousnesses. Post-human. Some of our people have chosen to modify themselves for specific environments or roles. Deep space explorers who can survive in vacuum, for instance, or researchers who enhance their cognitive capabilities for theoretical physics work. The uploaded consciousnesses are individuals who transferred their minds to artificial substrates for various reasons. Commander made a choking sound. You can transfer consciousness. It's been routine technology for about 300 years, said. Though not everyone chooses it, many people prefer biological existence. The scope of human capabilities was becoming clearer with each revelation. An admiral found himself facing a horrible realization. Everything his empire had achieved over 10,000 years, all their technological advances and military conquests had been accomplished by a species that was essentially playing in the shallows, while humanity swam in the deep ocean. Your expansion into our territory, he said slowly, you knew we would eventually respond. We were counting on it, admitted. We needed to understand your intentions and capabilities before making contact. Your reaction to human presence would tell us whether the Empire was primarily aggressive or primarily defensive. And your conclusion answered this time. Defensive. Your species is genuinely concerned about threats to your civilization and the species under your protection. That's admirable, but your methods are based on outdated assumptions about galactic power structures. She gestured, and the holographic display changed to show a broader view of the galaxy. Vast regions were marked in different colors, indicating various spheres of influence and control. The Empire was clearly visible, but it occupied a tiny fraction of the total space. This is what your intelligence networks can observe, explained. About 12% of this galactic arm, you've assumed that what you can see represents the major powers in the region. The display shifted, revealing areas that had been dark before. New civilizations appeared, some friendly, some neutral, and some decidedly hostile. The Empire, which had seemed vast and powerful, was suddenly revealed as a small state surrounded by entities of unimaginable scope and capability. The species we've been protecting you from said gently, operate on scales that make both our civilizations look insignificant. The hive mind, for instance, has consumed 14 galaxies over the past million years. They probe this region every few centuries, looking for new feeding grounds. Felt cold dread settling in his chest. We dealt with their most recent probe 6 months ago, said matter-of-factly. The engagement lasted about 17 minutes. They and haven't been back since. 17 minutes. They operate bioships that can manipulate reality at the quantum level. Very impressive technology. But they'd never encountered directed probability cascades before, so they were somewhat unprepared for our response. Admiral's worldview had now shifted so completely that he was having trouble processing basic concepts. Species that devoured galaxies, reality manipulating bioships, humanity casually defeating threats that sounded like something from ancient mythology. There are others, continued. The crystalline hierarchies in the galactic core have been dormant for 50,000 years, but they're beginning to show signs of activity. The machine prophets have been expanding their sphere of influence for the past century. The entropy cults are always a concern, and humanity protects the galaxy from these threats. We protect this region, corrected. Humanity isn't ready to take responsibility for the entire galaxy yet, but we do what we can to maintain stability in local space. The displays showed human defensive installations scattered throughout the galactic arm, massive constructs hidden in nebulae, monitoring stations disguised as asteroids, and weapons platforms that could crack moons if necessary. All of it had been built and maintained without any of the local civilizations being aware of its existence. The trade relationships you've been losing, said, aren't really about commerce, they're about early warning systems. The Federation's ships now carry our sensor packages. When they travel through their territory, we get real-time information about potential threats. The same is true for the other species that have begun working with us. You're building an intelligence network. We're preparing defenses. There's a difference. Commander finally found his voice again. What do you want from the Empire? Considered this carefully. Honestly, we'd prefer that you continue exactly as you have been. Your empire provides stability for dozens of species, maintains trade routes, and serves as a deterrent to smaller scale conflicts. That's valuable work. But added, we need you to understand the broader situation. Your expansion has been moving you toward regions of space that are problematic. We'd like to work with you to redirect that expansion in safer directions. And if we refuse? The two human women exchanged glances, and for a moment Admiral saw something in their expressions that reminded him why humanity had survived a war with galaxy-consuming entities. That would be unfortunate, said quietly. But the galaxy is a dangerous place. Civilizations that can't adapt to new information rarely survive long. Moved back to the windows, looking out at the battle group. We're not asking you to surrender your sovereignty or abandon your territories. We're asking you to join a larger defensive network. Your ship, your resources, your experience, they would be valuable contributions to galactic security. And in return, we share technology, not our most advanced systems, but certainly enough to improve your defensive capabilities by several orders of magnitude. We provide early warning about serious threats, and we ensure that your civilization survives whatever the universe decides to throw at us next. Admiral looked around the conference room at his officers who were still struggling to process everything they'd learned. The empire which he had served faithfully for over 2 centuries was not what he had believed it to be. They were not the masters of their region of space. They were not the most advanced civilization in the galaxy. They were not even aware of the true threats that surrounded them. But they were being offered a chance to become something greater. What would joining this network require? He asked. Ambassador smiled, and this time Admiral recognized the expression for what it truly was: hope. It requires admitting that the universe is bigger than we thought, she said, and deciding that we're going to face it together. 3 months after the meeting at Nexus Station, Sovereign Prime stood in his private chambers looking out at the capital city of Prime through a window that had witnessed the rise and fall of a dozen different galactic empires. The ancient ruler had lived long enough to see many changes, but none quite like this. The report in his hands was unlike anything in the Empire's archives. Written by Admiral in careful, precise language, it detailed the complete restructuring of strategic doctrine. The document that had begun as a simple military assessment had evolved into something much more significant, a blueprint for survival in a universe far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. Your Supremacy, Admiral stood at the chamber entrance, his forearms held in the traditional posture of respect, but there was something different about him. Now, a subtle change in the way he carried himself. The confident aggression that had once defined him had been replaced by something more thoughtful. Come in, Admiral said without turning from the window. I've been reviewing your recommendations. Enter the chamber and move to stand beside his ruler. The view from the window showed the bustling activity of the capital, with ships coming and going from the orbital platforms and citizens going about their daily lives, completely unaware of how dramatically their universe had changed. The council is adjusting to the new information, said carefully. I imagine they are. Tell me, Admiral, in your honest assessment, how long would our empire survive if humanity decided we were a threat? The question hung in the air between them. Had spent weeks running tactical simulations trying to find scenarios where forces could mount any kind of meaningful resistance against human technology. The results had been uniformly devastating. Hours, your supremacy. Perhaps days if we dispersed our fleets across multiple systems, but ultimately the outcome would never be in doubt. Nodded slowly, and yet they offer us partnership instead of conquest. Why? I believe Ambassador was sincere when she said they need allies, not subjects. The threats they face are apparently beyond what any single civilization can handle alone. The Sovereign Prime turned from the window and moved to his desk, where additional reports were scattered across the surface. Intelligence briefings, technological assessments, and diplomatic communications painted a picture of a galaxy that bore no resemblance to the one he thought he knew. The Federation has reported a 30% increase in trade efficiency since implementing human logistics software, he said, reading from one of the reports. The colonies have eliminated food shortage entirely after adopting human agricultural techniques. Even our own border systems are reporting improvements in early warning capabilities. The humans seem committed to improving conditions for everyone, agreed. Their technology transfers have been exactly what they promised, significant improvements that help our defensive capabilities without revealing their most advanced systems. Picked up another report, this one sealed with the highest classification markings, and this business with the deep space monitoring stations. Construction is proceeding ahead of schedule, your supremacy. The human engineers have been remarkably helpful. They're teaching our people to build and maintain systems that are most advanced. Scientists barely understand. The monitoring stations were perhaps the most visible sign of the Empire's new partnership with humanity. Massive sensor arrays positioned at the edge of space, designed to detect threats that might approach from beyond the galactic rim. The technology involved was so far beyond current Imperial capabilities that engineers were essentially learning an entirely new branch of physics. Have we detected anything yet? Expression grew serious. 2 minor incursions, your supremacy. Scout probes from something calling itself the Silver Communion. They approached our outer systems, apparently conducting reconnaissance, and the monitoring stations detected them while they were still 6 systems away. Admiral's people intercepted and destroyed the probes before they could gather any significant intelligence. The Silver Communion has not returned. Felt a chill run down his spine. Before the partnership with humanity, those scout probes would have penetrated deep into space without anyone noticing. Whatever the Silver Communion might have been planning, the Empire would have been completely unprepared for it. There's something else, your supremacy said hesitantly. The humans have shared additional information about galactic history, information that changes our understanding of our own Past, the Admiral activated a holographic display showing a timeline that stretched back tens of thousands of years. History was clearly marked, but it was surrounded by events and civilizations that had never appeared in their archives. The Great Silence that occurred 8,000 years ago explained the period when several major civilizations simply vanished from galactic affairs. We always assumed they had destroyed each other in wars or fallen to natural disasters. They were harvested, said quietly, reading the human historical data, by something called the Void Shepherds. Yes, Your Supremacy. The Void Shepherds operate on cycles measured in they return every 10 to 15,000 years to collect what they call mature civilizations for purposes that remain unclear. According to human records, they're due for another harvest cycle within the next few centuries. The scope of the threat was almost beyond comprehension. The Void Shepherds had been responsible for the disappearance of dozens of advanced civilizations throughout galactic history. Species that had achieved interstellar travel, developed sophisticated technologies, and built vast empires had simply vanished, leaving behind only empty worlds and scattered artifacts. And humanity believes they can resist such entities. They've done it before, Your Supremacy. The records indicate that the Void Shepherds have attempted to harvest humanity 3 times over the past millennium. Each attempt was repelled, with the Shepherds suffering significant losses. Studied the timeline more carefully, noting the patterns of expansion and retreat that marked humanity's presence in galactic affairs. The isolation period, they weren't recovering from a war with the Devourers. They were preparing for the next Shepherd incursion. Yes, Your Supremacy. 700 years of preparation, building defenses, developing new technologies, creating the infrastructure necessary to protect not just themselves but the entire galactic community. A soft chime filled the chamber, indicating an incoming priority. Communication activated the receiving system, and Ambassador's familiar face appeared in the holographic display. Sovereign Prime, she said with her characteristic warm smile, I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Ambassador, always a pleasure. What can we do for you? I wanted to inform you that we've detected some unusual activity in the Andromeda Galaxy. Long-range sensors suggest that the hive mind may be preparing for another expansion cycle. We're organizing a joint task force to monitor the situation and wanted to invite participation. Admiral stepped forward. What would that participation involve? Primarily intelligence gathering and early warning coordination. Your Empire's position gives you excellent sensor coverage of the approaches from Andromeda. If the do decide to make another attempt on our galaxy, advance warning would be invaluable. Considered this. 6 months ago, the idea of the Empire serving as an early warning system for some unknown threat would have been insulting. Now it felt like an honor to be trusted with such a responsibility. We would be honored to contribute to galactic security, he said formally. Excellent. Admiral will coordinate with Admiral on the technical details. There is one other thing, Your Supremacy. We've detected signs that the machine prophets are beginning to expand their influence again. They appear to be converting systems in the galactic core. To their purposes, it might be wise to begin evacuation procedures for any species in their projected path. Evacuation procedures, asked. The machine prophets don't destroy civilizations, explained. They convert them, transform organic life into mechanical forms that serve their collective consciousness. It's generally considered preferable to relocate threatened populations before the conversion process begins. The casual way she discussed the relocation of entire civilizations spoke to the scale of operations that humanity routinely managed. The logistics involved in moving billions of people across interstellar distances would strain the Empire's resources to the breaking point, but the humans spoke of it like a routine administrative task. We'll begin identifying suitable relocation sites immediately, said. Thank you, Your Supremacy. I'll send you the updated threat assessment data. And please don't hesitate to contact us if you need assistance with anything. We're all in this together now. The communication ended, leaving the two alone in the chamber. They stood in comfortable silence for several minutes, each lost in their own thoughts about the conversation they just witnessed. Admiral said finally, "Do you ever regret challenging them?" Considered this carefully. No, Your Supremacy. If we hadn't forced the issue, we might have continued in ignorance for centuries. By the time we discovered the truth about galactic politics, it might have been too late to adapt. And now we have a chance to be part of something larger than ourselves, to contribute to the defense of civilization itself rather than simply protecting our own territory. Nodded and returned to the window. Below, the city continued its daily rhythm, but everything was different. Now, the Empire was no longer the master of its local region of space, but it was part of something much more significant. A galactic community working together to face threats that no single species could handle alone. In the months that followed, the Empire would continue to adapt to its new role. Trade agreements would be renegotiated. Defensive installations would be upgraded, and diplomatic relationships would be restructured around the reality of humanity's protective presence. But perhaps most importantly, the people would gradually come to understand that their civilization had not been diminished by the discovery of humanity's true nature. It had been saved by it. Late that night, as prepared for sleep, in his private quarters, he found himself thinking about ambassadors. Smile. For months, he had wondered about that expression, that look of patient amusement that had never left her face during their negotiations. Now he understood. It hadn't been diplomatic courtesy or professional politeness. It had been the gentle expression of someone who had discovered a lost child wandering in a dangerous forest and was offering to guide them safely home. And for the first time in 800 years, Sovereign Prime felt truly secure about the future of his empire.